From the forges of creation to the tables of imagination, this is Behind the Chaos. There's a moment when you realize that you've gone from hobbyist to business owner. To the depths of chaos you go. That moment when you realize that your workbench becomes your desk, when your friends become your collaborators and trusted designers, and suddenly, out of nowhere, you're naming your own company. This is the story of how Chaotic Studios started, and how three passions ended up colliding into one huge melting pot. This will be the first episode of Behind the Chaos. Today on episode 1, we'll be reviewing the original story or origins and how Chaotic Studios was founded, created, thought of, and we'll go through all the process that, gave birth to this endeavor. So I hope that you come and join me on this ride as we kind of explore multiple points throughout the creation of our business in the last 2 years. What our struggles have been, what our successes have been, how we've gotten so far, and what we've learned. We will be going through some of our friends that will join us throughout the podcasts in future episodes. We will go through some D&D experiences that we've had, or some TTRPG experiences that we've come to know and love. We will discuss some topics that you guys will bring to the table that matter most to you. We will give advice, tips for anyone starting their own business, both in the industry and not in the industry. And furthermore, we'll just come and hang out. First thing that we would actually do is go back to why we started it all and how that kind of came to be. And it's kind of a long story, but to make it short, we're going to kind of go through some of the questions that I kind of get asked, or just conversations that come up every time I'm talking either about the business or I'm at a show, and people just ask me, how do I do that, and how do I get there, and what gave you the confidence to move forward with your own kind of venture and doing all these things, right? So my first answer of what inspired me is, I guess, a 2-point prong. Firstly, it was, I wanted something for me. I wanted something that, wasn't a 9-to-5, that I actually enjoyed doing. I wanted to learn a skill set that I could basically have and enjoy, right? At the same time, I was kind of brought into a campaign for D&D, and that was kind of like my first experience. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But for the skill set that I kind of wanted to learn, I didn't really know. I was thinking of, project management course, or, something of the sorts of marketing. So we went kind of like through a list of stuff that we could learn. And in the meantime, we're playing in this D&D game, and I start falling in love with it. I start thoroughly enjoying it. We end up going weekly. And I like the character. I like how it made me feel. I like how I could express myself. I liked how a story was unfolding. Right as kind of we got together and we kind of made that happen. And it just kind of evolved into me wanting to learn how to storytell, and me wanting to learn how to kind of act, how to play characters with different voices. And I thought that was fun. And I thought like it was a part of me that wanted to kind of come out and express themselves. While this was happening, 3D printing started to kind of be on the rise. So we ended up kind of going into I want to learn something. I'm enjoying my first Dungeons and Dragons and TTRPG experience. And then 3D printing is so damn cool. We just kind of went into the science of it all. We loved it. At the time, we only kind of knew of resin 3D printing, not even FDM printing or filament printing. So let me segue into kind of like our second portion of it in a little bit. But to kind of answer the question, what inspired me is just a mix and match of things that all happened roughly at the same time, where I just was a point in my life where I needed something. I needed something, again, to learn, to experience, to have a hobby, and to kind of grow. And that's how I kind of said, you know what, this is something I want to do. Albeit, I didn't kind of wake up and say, hey, I'm going to start my own company. I just really wanted a nice hobby and kind of continued on to that path. Like I said, out of nowhere, a hobby turned into chaos, and chaos turned into chaotic studios. So why did my 3D printing and love of that hobby kind of start? It kind of ties back to our first D&D experience. Our first D&D experience, in all honesty, was online. I got invited through a friend. We ended up joining online. I was rogue for all of 2 sessions, which is what kind of lasted with the just group that we had, right? Everyone was used to playing together, and then they just kind of took it online, and then online kind of fell through a little bit. So throughout those 2 sessions, we had a ton of fun. It was great. You know, we did the whole Discord thing, and it was fantastic. One of the players there just needed a little bit more, and he later became our dungeon master or game master, to where he kind of created his own campaign. And you know, we started right at the baseline, right? We did Lost Mines of Found Delver, just like many of you probably did, or many of you will be doing if you watch us and want to embark on an adventure. And that campaign took us like maybe a year or a little bit less. But when we made the switch from online to in person, right, there was just a whole other immersion level that we kind of saw happen, right? Our DM was extremely immersed. So they got a bunch of books, a bunch of minis, a bunch of maps that we kind of were fortunate enough to kind of experience the game in, right? So as kind of the story developed, and you know, more minis came, and you know, we would face different enemies, and you know, there was always that one hype moment where, you know, a big bad just plops on the table, and everyone's just losing their mind, right? Oh my god! And that part I just loved, you know, and as 3D printing, and I was looking into what I mentioned before of having that one thing to learn, I just kind of thought like, well, we can 3D print some minis, and I can learn how to sculpt and design and, you know, make miniatures. So I kind of went down that rabbit hole. And it was one of the best things I could do. I learned sculpting to a very basic level in a couple months, maybe 2-3 months, just, you know, spare time, and made my kind of like first mini. Then I got to just tinker around, and it was phenomenal. Now I should say that, you know, 3 months for sculpting and learning and kind of just bare basics was a little bit fast, but it did all happen kind of through COVID. So even though Chaotic Studios started basically a year and a half ago, the idea of it kind of went when we started that first campaign. And that first campaign was just 5 years ago. Right before the pandemic, we started it, and then maybe around through half of it, you know, shutdowns happened, and all of the world kind of turned around. So we did have to go back online. But as soon as we could, we went back to the table, we popped out our minis, we threw our dice, we had our dice towers, and we went back to that feeling of immersion. So you could say that I've been playing D&D for about 5-6 years, maybe 5. I've been a part of 4 different campaigns now. I DM'd 2, and have done multiple one-shots. Fun fact, I even recently wrote my first one-shot as just a fun exercise to see if I could get those creative juices flowing. It's called Duck Duck Doom, and it basically has a bunch of duck puns inside, and it's meant to just be lighthearted. I had a couple free time, and then I just kind of went down that rabbit hole, and it was a lot of fun. But anyways, I digress. I have to say, am I ever glad that my friend pulled me into D&D? It changed my life in more ways than one. Like I said, I was a little bit at a point in my life, and that kind of got me out of it. Then it gave me the idea to start my business. It introduced me to some amazing people who are still my friends, who I hope to bring the podcast later. Then it just kind of became the business and something that I deeply love in my life. Having said that, Chaotic Studios was born, but it didn't all come just from nothing, right? It wasn't just one day of, like I said, COVID had a lot to do with it and made me plan a little bit better, and we'll get into the whole business side of things at a later date in a different episode, and I hope you guys stick around to really see what those learnings were and how we kind of move forward and what we did for planning versus action. So stay tuned and follow that journey with us. But a lot of people do ask, okay, how do I start? What did you start with? And what are some of your recommendations, right? And I honestly started with a friend of mine. We decided to kind of go in with it together, and we were just part of the same party that with that first game that I started. And we said, hey, we're gonna make it happen. We're gonna do that, and let's just start with making our own minis and see what we can find and learn and tinker with. So we started with a Photon SE by Anycubic. Now, that one at the time was like the fancy one that had the door that would latch open, that then they discontinued, but I digress. We started with that one, and it had its problems that we'll get into as well in future episodes and kind of go through how we overcame those. But I will always remember the excitement that I felt when I first printed our kind of first mini. I'm not gonna lie, the first actual print was the test print that came with the files with the printer. But after that, we went on Thingiverse and found whichever, right? And I basically printed this little guy off. And I think it took about 2.5 hours to print. Then we painted it, and then yeah, that was our first print. Bulky, chunky, but it worked, and it got us super excited. So yeah, that was kind of what we made happen. All in all, Chaotic Studios was one of the best things I ever did, and it's still one of the best things that I've done. And I want to share my story through Behind the Chaos with you guys. As we end our first episode, I really do hope that you've enjoyed the first little beginnings of our journey. And at the end of each episode, we will roll a d20, and we will basically roll for insight. Depending on how low or how high the number is, we'll give you either a very harsh truth, a crude advice per se, crude insight, or a benevolent insight that that we can kind of leave with something to think about and hopefully uplift. So I got a dice tower back here, and let me roll. That's an 8. So an 8's not going to be too harsh, but we will see what that is. Okay, so insight of today's episode. Your gear won't fix your process. Get better before you get fancier. And with that, till the next episode of Behind the Chaos. See ya.